Thank you guys so much for joining us today. I will be going over some pond management techniques today, and this is being hosted by Effingham County with Blake and Glenn and McIntosh for myself. So let's see here. Little button is so tiny. Okay, so Blake Carter, he is the Agriculture and Natural Resources Agent for Effingham County, and then my name is MC Halbrook. I'm the Agriculture and Natural Resources Agent for Glenn and McIntosh counties. And
Oh, sorry. Got it. You're good.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. Alrighty. So today we will be reviewing ponds in Georgia. So to begin, a first couple of things to know is that ponds in Georgia typically are not going to be natural. We only have very few that are natural lakes. And most of them have been constructed for either controlling sediment as they flow through the watershed or to irrigate on farms. And then a lot of them that we have are very old and in need of renovation. So sometimes when you buy a plot of land that has a pond already on it, or you may have a pond that you installed, but it was a while back, it is possible that it could need some renovation. So it's definitely worth checking out. If you buy a plot of land that has a pond on it and you're not interested in trying to maintain it, you're probably not in this meeting. But there are organizations like the Nature Conservancy that are working to remove old dams to increase connectivity for streams. And so that could also be an opportunity if you have an older pond that you are no longer interested in maintaining. So, let's see. I don't know why it keeps going away. Okay, thank you. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to see it again. Okay, so some initial thoughts. 99% of ponds are spring fed from groundwater, and they can come from watershed runoff. And, even if it does have a spring that feeds it, it may not always be entirely fed. It could be fed from a water source that's coming in, or it could be fed from rainwater. So just because somebody says that they have a spring-fed pond doesn't mean that it is all fresh spring water from the ground. So that is definitely something to be aware of, is that your water could be coming from other places than just groundwater. And then fish production is directly tied to the productivity in the watershed. So some ponds are going to be naturally more productive than others, dependent on where they are in the watershed. Every pond has its limits, and we must take care to prevent water quality problems, because prevention is always better than having to correct them later. I'm sorry, Blake. This thing, you're going to probably have to just change it for me.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So a major concern for pond management is fish kills. So what happens if you find yourself with the fish kill problem in your pond? The very first thing that you want to do is assess the situation. So you want to just kind of take a step back, say, all right, well, this has happened. Here's what we're going to do. The first step is to start asking questions. How many fish are dead? What's the percentage of those that are dying? Is it happening all at once? Is it scattered across the pond? And then how many fish total do you have? So that'll help you get those percentages and to know if you're only seeing 1 or 2 dead fish, that you have a very large population. It's probably not something to worry about, but if it seems like it's the majority of your population, then those red flags really should be going off. Then the next thing you want to think about is, could it be a water quality problem? Could it be something where maybe you have added chemicals recently to the pond? Maybe somebody upstream has added chemicals, and that could be coming in. Also think about the color of the pond for the last few days. You know, were you seeing it very green? Or were you seeing it super clear? So you could even look at the coloration there. And then the next thing that you would look at is going to be the carrying capacity. So dependent on the nutrients and food that's available to the fish, maybe it's just missing and they don't have the food that they need. So you want to check and see if the ones who are still alive will accept pelleted feed. If that's the case, then it's probably more something along the lines of a water quality issue. But keep in mind all of these things as we're going through this discussion. Some of the things that we'll talk about today could answer some of these questions. And then naturally, if there's anything that does not answer your questions, you are always welcome to reach out to your local county extension office, and we can help either find the answer or get you connected to somebody who can. So the very first, most basic thing we'll start with is liming. So the reason we are going to want to watch for your liming is that the alkalinity or the total hardness can affect other factors within the pond. And this is something that UGA can help you with. We do have pond water quality testing where we can help you determine the total hardness of your pond. We generally recommend keeping it above 20 parts per million. And if you need to add agriculture lime, which is very common here in the state of Georgia, you could do that to help to achieve the total hardness needed. And so hardness is a measure, hardness is a measure of dissolved minerals, primarily calcium, and agriculture lime is derived of calcium. And you want to make sure that you are scattering that across the entire pond surface and not just letting it settle in one area. And if you don't have access to resources to help you scatter them, you can reach out to pond management consultants. And we have a list available through the Warnell School of Forestry on their outreach website. Alrighty, so total hardness or alkalinity is an indicator of water quality. When you are taking water samples, you're usually going to get that point in time of levels. So we usually think, oh, I'm going to look at the pH and that'll help. But if you look at figure 1 here, you can see that the pH can fluctuate throughout the day. And having higher alkalinity in your water is going to help to regulate that pH and keep it a little bit more even throughout the day, and then also a lot closer to neutral throughout the day. But if you have a lower alkalinity in the water, you can see the bell curve where it's going to be lower early in the morning, and then late into the evening, early the next morning, and then later in the afternoon, it's going to be much, much higher. And so those fluctuations throughout the day can be really drastic on your fish populations. On figure 2, we can see a scale of temperature and dissolved oxygen throughout the day. That is another one that will fluctuate on that 24-hour cycle. And so we know early morning, and then as you get into the evening and at night, it's going to be cooler. And so those lower temperatures, you'll see early morning, late at night. The dissolved oxygen levels will also be lower early in the morning and into the night because dissolved oxygen is coming from those photosynthetic plants and algae that are found in the pond system. So you really do want to try to have a healthy base of photosynthetic plants because they can be food and they also provide oxygen to the system. So when we think about ponds, you probably see everywhere an aeration system or a little fountain in a pond. And sometimes they're great for the aesthetic purposes, but they do also serve as a helpful resource too. And we get a lot of questions about should you aerate, should you not aerate? And for the most part, if you're in commercial production, you probably are going to want to aerate. Homeowners, your pond is probably not large enough that is going to be an issue. So you can generally bypass having an aeration system unless you want it for the aesthetics. What it will do is it will help to circulate the air throughout the system and help to kind of bridge that gap where you may have less photosynthetic plants. Then you can kind of aerate it in by bringing in that surface water. So if you are going to aerate, it's best to try to do that at night when those photosynthetic plants aren't active and they're not producing the oxygen. Alrighty. So there can be questions about breaking the thermocline. And then I believe on the next slide, I've got an image of the thermocline. So we'll come back to that in just a moment. But that is a level where you'll have really cool water down below the thermocline, and then you'll have your warm water up above. And so sometimes breaking that thermocline can provide a regular mixing to bring up some of those, the water that doesn't quite have the oxygen, bring it closer to the surface so it can get more oxygen in, and just in general kind of cool off the pond. But that's usually not going to be a need. You may see more issues with breaking up that thermocline than it actually will be helpful. So we don't really recommend that unless it's something like the surface waters are getting too hot or something along those lines. You can't hear me? Oh, just on your computer. I'm so sorry. I think we're having more technical difficulties. Okay. Some of the participants, David, are you able to hear me? Yes. Okay. All right. Then I will continue. Okay. So for the thermocline that I was talking about, you can see that here in the middle, it says thermocline temperature separation. And turnover does occur naturally as the seasons change, but it can be caused by cloudy days, heavy rain, extreme wind conditions. All of those will cool off that upper level of water. And then because it'll be cooler, it'll just naturally kind of mix in there. The heavy rain and the wind conditions can be a physical mixture too. So sometimes that's something to be cautious of, is that your conditions in your pond may change after extreme weather events. And when there is a seasonal mixture or turnover in the pond, the fish will have time to acclimate to the differences in the oxygen levels. So that is not cause for concern. But when it happens rapidly is when you are concerned, because now all of a sudden the oxygen is being taken out of the system and the fish are not going to be able to breathe. So we can see that with weather events, but we can also see it when we ourselves create conditions by over-fertilizing, overstocking, and overfeeding. So that's definitely something that you want to monitor and make sure that you're not being too nurturing to your pond system. Okay, so for the next slide, we have information about fertilization and how it boosts the food chain. So very naturally, you're going to have at the base of your food chain is going to be those plant materials, and then it'll go into the larger and larger predators until you get up to your fish species. when we think about boosting the food chain system, we're actually just adding more food, which will make for more fish, larger populations, not necessarily larger individuals. So there could be this misconception of, okay, if I fertilize, it'll put out more food and then I'll have those trophy fish. And that may not be the case. What it will do is it's going to provide food for a larger population to be sustained. So it will increase the carrying capacity of that pond by about 4 times. So instead of having, for example, a 100 pound per acre carrying capacity, it's going to go up to 400 pound per acre carrying capacity. One important thing to note is that fertilized ponds are green. So if you don't want a green pond, don't fertilize. So you're fertilizing that plant material, and plant material is green. So that is how that would go about. So ponds that are muddy or weedy, that may have existing dense plankton blooms, or have fish populations that are out of balance, you probably don't want to fertilize those, because they're already trying to work on getting balance back out in other areas, and adding fertilizer is just going to increase the problem and not help it. So to get proper fertilization, you're going to want to do several applications throughout the year, and it's going to depend very much on your pond and the conditions surrounding it, the water that's coming in, the water that's going out. So to monitor whether or not you need to fertilize, you would look at it as a scale of visibility. So you can use a Secchi disc, which is pictured here in the image with the black and white ring. And you can use a Secchi disc to test for the depth of visibility. And if you are going to treat with fertilizer, you could use a liquid fertilizer. It's going to dilute out. If you use granulars, you're going to want to set them in some type of a platform so that they don't get lost in the bottom of your pond. So you would want to float them on like a wooden pallet at about 4 to 12 inches deep, or if you get it in a bag, you could just cut open the bag, but leave it in the bag, and it'll just kind of come out on its own that way, and not get lost in the system. So a little bit more about Secchi discs on the next slide. Yes, thank you. So you could get a professional Secchi disc if you would like. They're about $25. You could also make your own with really anything that's round. So we've got, for example, on this slide, a pie pan, a 5-gallon bucket lid. You just want to paint it so that you can clearly see where the disc is as you're going down, and then add some weight to it, because a pie pan is just gonna it's gonna float. It's not gonna sink on its own. So as you lower it down into your pond, you'll watch for it. And once you can't see the Secchi disc well anymore, that white and black just kind of look all about the same, that is where your depth of visibility is. So we say about 12 to 24 inches of visibility, and you're doing pretty good. If you can drop your Secchi disc lower than about 24 inches, then you're going to want to fertilize. If you just barely put your Secchi disc in and it already disappears before you get down about a foot, then you're probably running into an issue where there's an algal bloom, or there may be a lack of oxygen. So you want to monitor that, and a treatment could be aerating to kind of circulate things there. And so if you don't want to have a green pond, but you do want to have a blue pond, there are options out there. You could get pond dyes. So we've got Dion and Aquashade are 2 examples that you could use. They will limit the productivity, so it's going to kind of be a block, and the plants and other photosynthetic organisms in your pond won't really be able to get that sunlight that they need for photosynthesis. So you're taking away the base of that food chain, and it could even limit or cause fish kills. So I would recommend being very cautious. If you want a blue pond, you may not want it to be one that you use for fishing. It's maybe just for aesthetics. So do keep that in mind. There are options out there, but it is something to be a little cautious of. So if you are on a farm, you may use your pond for livestock watering, and that is such a great resource. It's one less thing that you really have to worry about. They're able to just access it on their own. But if you're going to have it as a multi-use pond, you may want to take some other factors into consideration. So as your cattle or your livestock are going into the water, they can deteriorate the banks. And so that's going to mess with your aquatic vegetation. It's going to take away some of that habitat for those aquatic invertebrates that are living there that are food for the fish in your pond. It could also lead to erosion problems, and that could be very difficult to remediate. And you could control or limit the access that your cattle have by, like in this image, we have a picture where they're kind of roping off the area that the cattle can go in just this little corner. They don't have access throughout. So they're still able to get that water, but they're not really messing with the system that much. So it could really be a positive or a negative. And when we're thinking about in terms of fertilizer, cows do what cows do best, and they're going to poop wherever they are. And we love to use their manure in our gardens or in our farming as a fertilizer. But if they're in the pond, then that manure will also be a fertilizer to the pond. So that is something to consider if you already are on a fertilizer routine, that you may need to apply less or less frequently because you're already having some of the needs met. Or if you weren't intending to fertilize, maybe you want to consider not having them have access at all. So that's not going into the system. Okay. So some other factors that can affect the pond water quality that you may see. We have muddy ponds and bryozoans. So muddy ponds can come from many different causes. It might be from undesirable species. So different types of catfish especially can come in and disturb the bottom and cause muddy waters. So if you have a pond that is stream fed, then there's the chance that other species that you may not intend to have in your pond can be easily introduced. So it's definitely something to monitor for unwanted species. It could also be that there is poor conditions further up in the watershed. The water source may have some issues too, but it's most likely there's something that's going on upstream or further up in the watershed that is loosening all of that mud, that silt, that dirt, and it's coming into the system, and it's just staying in the water column where you can see it. So sometimes it may take looking at the bigger picture. If you see a muddy pond, you may need to take a step back and say, okay, well, where is the water coming from? And where could that mud also be coming from? You may need to talk to some neighbors and see what types of maybe construction are going on. And again, like I mentioned earlier, prevention is key. It's always easier to prevent having a problem than it is to remediate a problem. So when you have a pond, you really want to try to have good systems in place. Aquatic vegetation is a great example. It's usually pretty cost effective. They tend to just kind of grow on their own. There's not much that you're going to have to do to monitor them. And I'm so sorry, excuse me. and they can help to limit some of that erosion, some of that muddiness that's coming into the system by collecting it there in the plant material. Bryozoans, on the other hand, they are jelly-like structures that you may see in your pond, especially in the later summer or early fall. They might look a little funny and disturbing, and you may be like, oh my goodness, what is going on with my pond if you see them, but they actually are a good thing. They are colonial invertebrates, so they live together, they grow together. You will see it as this yellow blob. We have an image of one here, but they're actually many different bryozoan combined to make that one. They do tend to form and clump together starting at about spring, and then in the winter they're going to die off and you won't see them as much. They are a sign of good water quality, and the reason behind that is because they are filter feeders. So they're filtering out the water as they're growing and living, and so it's actually a really good thing to have them in there because they can help you. So two things to look at there for different water quality factors. So sometimes when you have a pond, you will have a dam that fails, you'll have piping that breaks or needs to be replaced. There may be issues with the sealing of the pond, and so you may need to do some renovations. Draining a pond can be very challenging, and part of draining a pond would also include getting rid of the fish and other wildlife that are in the pond. So what we recommend, if you need to renovate your pond, you're going to want to drain it down until there's some puddles, and ideally your fish will have gone into those puddles. And then you could treat those puddles as a DIY method. You could use chlorine, but our recommendation is to use rotenone, and that needs to be applied by somebody who has their pesticide applicator's license. So you may have to call in a friend or reach out to a pond consultant. But that will help to kill off the remaining fish. And it is a very short-term chemical, so it will kind of move out of the system pretty quickly. We can usually see restocking at about a month after an application, and it breaks down into water and carbon dioxide, so it's environmentally friendly and it's safe to use in an aquatic system like this. However, both of these are non-selective, so they're going to kill anything that's remaining there. So do be prepared for that. This is probably not going to be a treatment that you want to use just to get rid of unwanted species, because it's going to kill off everything that's in the system. So once you have all of that drained off, then you can look into engineering. So if you are in need of fixing, or maybe you want to build a pond on your system, on your land, and there's many resources out there who can help you. Of course, your extension office can help you, but really the better resources for building a pond and getting those engineering designs, getting connected, is you're going to want to start with the NRCS, and they can help provide resources. They can connect you with contractors, but they can also help you to determine resources within the watershed, how the drainage of your area goes, and then any soil considerations for your local area that you need to use. Another recommendation that we have is we have a company in Georgia that is called Pond Dam Piping, and they can be a great resource where they can help you to design and send you the equipment that you need to build any type of pond drain that you're putting in or repairing. So that could be a great resource, and they're here local in Georgia. So that's a great resource. On these next couple of slides, we have some examples of some technical documents for pond construction that you could receive from NRCS. And they also have different resources and funding opportunities. They may be able to help you with your pond building or rebuilding, maintenance, anything along those lines, that if they have the resources, they would be able to share that with you. Like a pond drain system, you would also want to establish an emergency spillway to help to control the water height levels. It's on the next slide. Okay, there we go. Alrighty, so an emergency spillway really would be in those like torrential downfall, rainfall events. And you've got the water is rising rapidly, especially if it is stream fed and there's rain further upstream, then you could see issues with it flooding your pond as well. So when you have an emergency spillway, you want to make sure that that is clear at all times. And ideally, you're not going to use it all the time. Hopefully it's dry, and unless there's those emergency events. So I will also say that there are great resources with NRCS. You may have to get some permitting through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. You may need to talk to the EPD to do some permitting or any mitigation efforts that they may require. So it's actually a very big undertaking to do any type of physical work on building a pond or fixing those areas. So you definitely want to make sure that you have all of your T's crossed and I's dotted, and reach out to those organizations who are able to help you, but also offer guidance and work through the permitting process. And so with that, I will hand the presentation over to Blake for a discussion on weed ID and control.
Thank you, MC. I did drop while you were talking 2 resources, so I want to point it out to everybody. That's the NRCS documents for pond construction. So if you're wanting to construct a pond, that's a great place to go to do that. The other one is the pond dam and piping website we also mentioned. MC, you can hear me good? Everything good? Okay, cool. All right, so we're going to get started and jump into the weed control. So when we talk about this is one of the most common questions I think me and MC probably will get outside of doing just regular pond samples is, how do we solve these problems? So we're going to talk about a little bit of that. First of all, to understand ponds and weed control, we also got to think about what a weed is, and that's a plant, obviously. So sunlight, nutrients, and of course water are needed for these things to grow. And we can't control the water and the sunlight, but we can control the depth of the pond and the shade within that water. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. We can only do what's in our own ability, right? So we can control weeds before adding those nutrients. So that's a big thing. So for fertilizing, like MC suggested, in your ponds, we want to take care of those bad, unwanted plants or overabundance of them. Once the weeds are controlled, adding the nutrients if needed will help with an algae bloom. Again, if the pond needs nutrients, and that goes back to what MC was talking about. What she also said were sometimes we'll see weeds creep in from the sides. Now that's not always a bad thing, because we want to keep some vegetative growth on those edges of those ponds. So it's a fine balance. So when we're trying to talk about whether or not it's a bad thing, a good thing, you want to see how it's affecting your pond. So if it's creeping out there and you're not getting any kind of visibility, down to 6 inches or not, we've got weeds coming up all the top of the water. That's going to shade out a lot of stuff. That's going to mess up your oxygen levels. That's when we're going to start talking about maybe fixing some of that problem. It's all about balance when it comes to pond weed management. Now, Moving into control of weeds, identification of these pests are number one. All right. And that's the baseline for us to be able to help you. And a lot of times with pond weeds, it's important to note where the weed is. If it's if it's above the water, if it's submersed, and if it's a submersed weed or it's a floating weed in the pond, bringing it to us in that state will help us identify it. If you take a floating weed out of the pond and it dries up, it's going to be harder for us to identify exactly what kind of weed it is. And sometimes they clump together, so it's really hard to tell exactly what they're saying or what it is. You want to assess the acreage, how big, how much of the infestation is in the pond. Is it just one corner? Because that also helps you figure out, maybe it's coming in from somewhere, maybe it's draining in, maybe it's coming from a runoff or something to that effect, and it's coming into the pond, or maybe your pond's connected to another pond somehow, and it's filtering in. That's a way for us to determine where the problem's starting. Sometimes that's a big thing. So you're going to need to know how big your pond is. And that also helps us when it comes to applications and recommendations for those applications. How many acres is affected, your flow rate. That's another thing. Are you going to be able to get out there and actually apply things? That helps us know what we can recommend. If there's a chemical that we need you to go across the pond with and you don't have a boat, well, we obviously can't go that route. You might need to contact someone else to come help you. What season it's in also matters, because as we get colder weather, the difference of how we're going to approach a problem is going to change. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. What other weeds are in the pond, and which ones are the good ones we want to keep, and which ones are the bad ones. So if there's good weeds that some of these chemicals can take out, we want to know. We want to make sure we don't touch the habitats of our fish. And how fast do you want it gone? That's another question. Sometimes these take a little bit of time. The easiest thing to kind of solve or to take care of some of these weed controls might take a few months, and I'll talk about that in just a second as well. So there are a few resources available, and there's a QR code here on the screen if y'all want to screenshot or take a picture of that. Again, this recording will be available, so if y'all want to take it later, y'all can, but that's going to take you to Aquaplant. Aquaplant is really, really good resource. It helps you identify what kind of plants you have going on out there in the water. One of my favorite apps is to use. Let me see the name. I've done forgot it off the top of my head. Picture This, but the problem with Picture This is you got to have it out of the water. Picture This does not work with a submersed or a water covering the plant, because it kind of distorts what it looks like. So if you're going to do that, be very mindful of that. It also gives you weed management techniques, herbicide recommendations, ornamental propagation techniques, all that good stuff. Obviously with herbicide recommendations, we would love for y'all to talk with us before y'all go and spray, because these chemicals for ponds, there's a fine line between doing what's right and then accidentally causing a fish kill or something of that nature. So one of my favorite recommendations for people that want to have a fish pond is adding the good type of fish and having a balance. Stocking rates matter. One thing I did is looked up grass carp right now for price per acre. That way, we're talking. I don't want to go and tell y'all to go out and buy so much carp, and it's a detriment to your expenses, especially down near the holiday season. I know y'all got presents and stuff to buy, so I don't want to do that to y'all. But right now, I priced it with Southland Fisheries. They're right here in South Carolina, right across the border. But there's also a fishery in Richmond Hill, and I'm sure that they're very close to the price point, but you're looking at about $12 per carp. Okay. And now there is a difference, because if you go to some of these fisheries and you don't necessarily know what you're wanting or know how to say it, sometimes they're going to try to take advantage of you. Okay. So there are another option for carp, and it's a big carp. The problem with it is metabolism slows as those carp get bigger. And I put that on there as age, they get slower. So their metabolism gets slower, so they're not as effective. They're not as useful. Unless you just want some really good showy fish in your pond, I would not go for the big carp. You want smaller carp, right? The greatest impact is about 12 to 24 inches in length. And they have about a 7-year productivity on them. We're running about, depends on the fishery you go to. Our recommendation, you can get away with 5 per acre. So that's $60 investment. That's for preventative. So if there's nothing out there already and you want to just get your ducks in a row, 5 to 8 is what we're shooting for. 10 to 20 carp is corrective. So if you've got an overabundance of weeds out there that grass carp will eat, and I'm going to show you that on the next slide, that's where you're going to want to go to is that higher rate. I would almost even say cut the difference about 15, and that'll help you out. Speaking of what grass carp actually eat, the ones I highlighted here are the most common that we see. Now, high and moderate means that is highly effective for carp to get to. Moderate is it'll help when you have a moderate control of those weeds. So you might want to, if you have a heavy infestation, you're going to need some chemical help with it. That low category is going to be more for grass carp. Aren't really going to help. I mean, they might help a little bit, but if you've got a severe problem with any of those, we're going to go ahead and go for a chemical treatment instead. But like I said, naiads, bladderwort, duckweed, some of the algae, pond weeds, pennywort, those are really good. Primrose is also another common one that we see. Those are all great to take care of with grass carp. Parrot feather, torpedo grass, and watermeal. Watermeal is all over the place around here every year, and sedges too. That's not going to be really useful with grass carp. So we're going to need to really do some chemical control with those. Now, so we've done the grass carp. It's not working. We got to have these chemical controls. What does that mean? Well, chemical weed control is an option regardless, but I always try to solve the problem without going to chemicals first. But if we can't, some scenarios, you're always going to have, you're going to want immediate results sometimes, right? And that's what chemicals bring to the table. In this situation, chemical control is the best option especially if you want immediate overnight results almost. I wouldn't say overnight all the time, but some of these chemicals work pretty daggone fast. Depends on the time of year and the temperatures. Like I said, if it's colder, I'm not going to try to solve problems with chemicals. And the reason behind that is chemicals slow down those active, the activity of the chemical isn't going to be as effective. So you're not going to have the control you're wanting. You're going to actually waste a lot of money trying to apply these chemicals when it's cold. You want to apply chemicals when it's a little bit warmer. Now, granted, in Georgia, depending on where you're at, you might get away with treating stuff right now with chemicals. Not all the time though, right? Because 2 weeks ago we were in the 30s, and then we bumped up to the 90s, and now we're back into the middle of the ground. So it's a hit or miss, and I don't like to play with Mother Nature because she does come back with some vengeance. So typically when we hit about mid-October, I try to cut off applying chemicals to ponds kind of about the time you're planting, or if you're near any hay fields or anything that overseed during the wintertime. If you start to see people planting grass in their fields to overseed with rye and oats, that's a good time to cut off treating ponds with chemicals. Now there are potential problems, and there are a number of applications. I know for watermeal, some of those, that's a hard one to treat. If you don't get it all, it's going to keep coming back. You want to make sure you're going to do 1 or 2 applications of it. So you want to make sure you're looking at that label for those ounces. Now there's different modes of action to familiarize yourself with, because it can get really crazy trying to pronounce all these words in general. So just knowing exactly what you're getting into is a good way to start. So systemic herbicides are actually absorbed and move within the plant. So you're not going to necessarily need a lot of foliage for a systemic herbicide to really work. Now, when you get to contact herbicides, on the other hand, it's meant for what it says it does, and that is contact. So it needs to hit the plant. So you're going to need some of those bigger, broader leaf plants or a good bit of foliage. Some of those that you're going to see, and I'm sure everybody's heard copper. Copper is an option. Copper is also my least favorite option unless you have algae, because it is a tough one to get right without causing your fish to die. And I don't want your fish to die. Diquat is something I've recommended quite a bit around here because it works really, really well. Like I said, I would not recommend any of these right now, just for the time of year, but these are some of the contact herbicides that we could use. The other cool thing that we offer is Warnell has a really good index for some of these pond consultants. So if you want to, again, we love some QR codes, and I think they're one of the niftiest things that COVID brought everybody into the world of. And you can go ahead and screenshot that or take a picture, and it'll take you to the pond consultant page, and you can put in your nearest where you're at. You can look and see which one's the nearest one. But they're not just for consulting you on a problem. They do a lot of stuff where they actually come in there and they'll apply the chemicals for you. They'll help you get it out there. They'll do a whole lot of things for you because they have the proper equipment to do it. And that's a lot of times what prevents people from doing proper pond management is that they don't have the right tools to do it. So we want to make sure that you have everything you need to be able to do what you need for your pond to succeed. Now, long-term control, I'm going to say it till I'm blue in the face. It goes back to what MC said, and that is fertility and liming, pH, and hardness. If you solve those problems or prevent those excess of problems to happen, you're going to be set for a better chance of a good quality fishing pond. Now, we're going to check that hardness and alkalinity. I think our pond price for right now is like $24, $26 for a basic pond water sample. There is another pond option that we do through our office, a little bit more expensive, but it does test for algae, test what kind you got. You want to make sure, and I'll show you on the next slide what those pond tests looks like. But you want to look at runoff. If you're near any fields, even by the road, our road department sometimes will throw out some fertilizer. If that runoff gets in there, you're going to create algae blooms almost every time. Now, algae blooms will go away on their own most of the time. It takes a while, but they're not great, right? Sometimes you do want a good algae bloom because there are positive ones, but there's also negative ones. And then you want to look at that fertility, overstocking, overfeeding. That's another big thing. You want to get your ratio of stocking correct. If not, there's going to be a problem. And just to give you a heads up about algae, I know MC covered about the cattle. There is one type of algae that will come off or will form in a pond when you have runoff, and that's blue-green algae. That is actually toxic to cattle. And it's very hard to see, especially if you're colorblind like me. You're probably never going to be able to tell it's out there. But when you start to see cattle get really sick and die really quickly, odds are it's because of the blue-green algae. So you want to make sure that you see, you're keeping your record of what's going on out there. Now, like I said, I want to show you a bad pH sample that I've gotten. Now, I've had one that's lower than this. I've had one that was 4.2 for a pond. Is pretty daggum low. There was a photo that MC showed on one of her slides where the fish were dead and their eyes were bulging like they were oxygen depleted. A pH level that low, or it needs to be a little lower than the 5.3. It's not going to affect it here. But if it's about that 4, 5 lower, you're going to have fish that are deformed, that are going to have those problems. They're going to have busting eyes out. They're going to die, and you're going to think something's going on. Well, odds are it's your pH level. You see the hardness there too at 11. We talked about 20 and higher is best for us, right? Well, at 11, it's not doing too well. Now, what are your options? Well, that's going to be what your results come back as. And then this is going to be your recommendation. Is going to be on the next page for it. And you can see here it's recommending 1.25 tons of agriculture lime. All right. Now, that being said, there are several types of lime out there. There's liquid lime, there's catalytic lime, and dolomitic lime. Whichever one your pond needs, it'll tell you. Now, the one thing I will say, liquid lime, you don't want to put a lot out there at once. The reason is because you can over apply liquid lime and disperse it too fast, and it will cause a severe problem. Same thing with some of the catalytic lime. You want to kind of not put so much out there all at once. You're going to want to probably split your applications even more than what you would on for dolomitic or agricultural lime. Now 1.25 tons per surface acre is pretty standard for us. Down here we can probably get away with about 2 tons per acre and you're okay. I mean, even with that pH being 5.3, I mean, you can throw 2 tons out there, see what we get, and see if we can get it up a little bit more. You might need to do it again. But just keep that in mind, that down here, you can't get away with almost too much lime. Now you just need to split it and do it, in increments. But I mean, about 4 tons I've even seen, needed for a pond to go from that 5.3 up. So just keep that in mind. If your pine trees are growing well, that means your pH is low. And that's another thing. If you got pine needles that are falling in, getting in there, that's some acidity that's being added to that pond. So just keep that in mind. Now with algae, like I said, there are ways to take care of this. We can do different control methods. Copper, like I said, is number one. Be careful with copper. Copper can cause fish kills. It happens very easily. So you want to be very cautious on how you treat it. Usually nutrients are purposely added to fish ponds to fertilize them. Fertilizers will actually stimulate the growth of platonic algae, which are eaten by microscopic animals. Chemical treatments are a quick and effective way to get rid of them. But in some situations, you must consider the water hardness to ensure you don't have a fish kill. So if your pH and water hardness are low and you have algae, copper is probably not going to be what you want to go towards because it can actually increase the likelihood of a fish kill. Too much copper is lethal to fish, and also be aware that any copper is deadly to trout. So luckily we don't really have that many trout in our ponds, but just give you a heads up. Some of the other good controls, like I said, Dicot. I've used flumoxazine is another one that I've used in the past, but typically Clipper and like Reward, they're not going to be something I go to unless it's a minor algae bloom. If it's a severe algae bloom, copper is going to make it the best for you. But you're going to want to treat 1/3 of the pond each 7 to 10 days, because you don't want to treat the whole pond. That comes back to that fish kill. If you treat a whole pond with copper, it will cause a fish kill, almost guaranteed. Some other weeds I want to just kind of go over that I've seen very frequently is slender spike rush. So they're submersed, free floating form. Though they are tangled in long branches, when you take it out, that's going to be what it looks like on that paper towel. They're going to be these long strands, but if you put it in water, it flows and it floats. And if you had this in your pond, I'd want you to bring me this in some water, not just on the paper towel, because you see how it clumps up right there. In the water, it kind of separates out, and you can actually separate those strands into individual plants. So you can kind of see what it is better, because that, believe it or not, as a clump, there's like 3 other pond weeds that could actually be. I mean, it's very typical that they kind of look like that. So slender spike rush, you want to kind of get it in a little mason jar, float it in there, and bring it to your county agent. We can kind of look at it. Now, Reward, like I said, that's a Dicot, that's a good one. Clipper is also good control. Amazamox is another one that's pretty decent. These are some of the chemicals. Like I said, Reward and Clipper are going to be your most common that you can find, or at least in Effingham. I'm sure at some of the other feed and seed stores in Glen and McIntosh or around that area, you're going to find those as well. Alligator weed, good news for us is we don't really see this weed that much. Now, that being said, I have seen it once. So I put it in here because at first I didn't really know what I was looking at. Alligator weed is most commonly spread across the surface of the water, but it spreads like wildfire. And so it'll take over the banks and into the water very, very fast. This is where you're going to want to use some of these other chemicals like imazapyr, Habitat and Arsenal are very good. Those are 2 I've used. Mainly Arsenal is the one I've gravitated towards, but it's an imazapyr. But you do have to add an adjuvant. Grass carp does not like this as much. Clipper will be okay. So if you have a smaller control area, you can do it here with Clipper. Just be mindful of that it might not do the best job. I would definitely kind of recommend an Imazapyr on this one. Cattails, spread from creeping root stalks and seeds. Some people really like the aesthetic of this, and it's okay to have it around the banks and in a controlled area. So as long as you're controlling it decently, you're fine. But if it starts spreading, kind of like lily pads or water lilies, sometimes people want them in their ponds, and that's fine. You just got to make sure that they're not covering the whole pond itself. So to kind of get some control of that, you're going to look at rodeo as a good one. Those are all those glyphosate. There are when you think of glyphosate, you probably think of Roundup. Make sure it's the aquatic label for Roundup. All right. There's different labels. So you want to make sure it's on label for ponds. I know that's crazy to say, but not all Roundup is created equal. Imazapyr is another option here. And like I said, Dicquat's okay as well. Like I told you, some of these kind of look like spike rush if you clump it together and it's dried. So, like I said, a naiad is very common around here. It's especially common with that low hardness and alkalinity, and it gets that nitrogen from runoff, and it will run like crazy. Grass carp are good for this as well, but you don't want to combine grass carp and copper sulfate together because you're going to cause fish kill. I would say from a moderate standpoint, grass carp are good. Like I said, preventative. Go ahead and get them in your pond. If you have a corrective need for it, throw them out there and see if they can get most of it before we have to go to any of these copper treatments, because you don't want to have to go to copper unless you absolutely have to. Some more here, water shield or dollar bonnet. These are I've seen these a few times out in the pond. Some people get this confused with duckweed because of just how kind of they float, but duckweed's a little bit smaller or a lot smaller actually. So it's very easy to tell the difference, but they do have that kind of same shape to a leaf. And if you're not really familiar, you might think it is. Excellent control again is that Imazapyr and 2,4-D for this. A lot of your bigger, broader weeds, an aquatic 2,4-D will work as well. So just kind of keep that in mind. Good control. Basically, if you can keep rodeo, a clipper, and an arsenal on hand, you're going to be able to treat any weeds out there. Just knowing which ones you got is very important. But those are 3 chemicals I always recommend for people to kind of keep on hand. It's also good because they work on different weeds, and some of them are the same weeds, so you can actually rotate that chemical class or chemical family, and that's good to prevent any kind of buildup of resistance out there in your pond. Duckweed is pretty bad. It's the second worst one I'd say I get. It covers a pond. It will blanket it. It is essential that you get complete eradication. These next 2 weeds, this one and the next one, are absolutely awful. They are the most headaches for pond managers. Floridine is your best option. I would definitely gravitate towards that. That's that Sonar. Clipper's pretty good at it too, but I definitely, for this particular weed, Floridone is what I would go with. You can do some good control with like Reward and Dicquat mixtures, but like I said, that eradication is essential all across the pond. This is when you might, if you have a big pond and you can't go across it all at once, this is when that pond consultant really can come in handy to make sure that you get a complete control of it, because it will come back, and it'll come back with a vengeance. Watermeal is another one that's pretty bad. We've had this at my family's pond for, gosh, almost every year. And that's just because my uncle refuses to buy the chemicals I tell him to buy, so that's our own fault. But we do have to battle it. If you don't only get a little bit of it, it will still be there. You can do that clipper. It is about $160 an acre. Like I said, it's a good one to have on hand, even though it's a little bit expensive. It works really, really well. And it does a great job. Once you get this corrected, and that's the other thing I want to explain, is there is an investment to a pond. You can't just wake up one day and want a pond and want it to be beautiful, want a good fish pond. It takes work and it takes investment. That being said, the initial investment is going to be high. And if you have a problem, it's going to be high to fix it. But once you solve it, it's cheaper to go ahead and solve it, and then let's correct it going forward than just every year just treating it with a chemical and not doing anything different with your practices. It takes a little bit of both. The next one is spider rush. Like I said, we've already kind of talked about this one. And then I kind of wanted to show y'all what it looks like in the water. We got slender spike rush, like I said, and then that's what it looks like in the water. And it kind of doesn't look like what it looks like in that photo up above it. It looks like a mat. That's why I said we got to get it out of that so we can kind of see it floating individually so I can identify exactly what it is. That water pennywort is a problem that I've seen a few times, especially in some ponds that were near more of some of the murkier ponds near some of the swampier area for me. I've had some of this come up and some of the primrose I'm going to show you in the next slide. But that 2,4-D is going to work. Imazapyr is going to do a great job. It's going to do excellent control of it. Like I said, grass carp's going to do okay. So if you've only got a little bit out there and you've got grass carp, let them work and see what happens without jumping to a chemical. Water primrose, glyphosate is going to be great. Imazapyr is going to be great. Triclopyr and 2,4-D. These are all really good things to work on this particular weed. DNR professionals hope that you'll choose to live with it, though. It can cause problems for some, but often it provides more of a habitat. So, like, if this isn't a problem, this is where the banks, having some on the banks and right there next to the water is okay. But when it gets to a point where that's all that you see, that's when we need to think about treating it. Chemical control options are really good for this one, so it can be controlled easily. But like I said, it's a good one to have on that bank and really help with the habitat management. White water lily, like we talked about earlier, some people like it. Some people don't. I've seen a pond when I was heading up to North Georgia, and all you could see is the lily pads and the flowers. That is a problem. That takes away all that sunlight and kind of suffocates the pond. So we want to take care of that, but they will spread as well. Lily pads will spread pretty fast. So you want a control of them. 2,4-D is going to do great. Triclopyr is going to do great. Glyphosate is going to do okay. So, you want to make sure that you have something that's going to work really well on these. The fallen plants, DNR folks kind of have talked to me about they're okay in these habitats. They're good for ponds. There are some people that don't want a single weed in their pond, and I get that totally. But at the same time, you want some. You got to really think about it from the standpoint of, yes, it might not be the most sightly thing in the world, but these habitats, these are what things need. These are what prevents runoff. This is what prevents low populations of fish. You want to create these environments that are putting you in the best position to succeed. They seldom creep further than the shoreline, so that's a good thing with the soft rush. It provides a great buffer plant to keep things from running into the pond. It also takes up space in shallow water where other noxious weeds could take the place. So it's kind of like a better option. Think of it like you want to, instead of bushes around your house, these are what you want inside your pond, around your pond. Smartweed's another one. Is a marginal weed that typically grows along the shoreline of ponds. They don't really tend to have these problems, but they do but if they do renovate, makes a great option along with other products listed. You got your 2,4-D, your glyphosate, Imazapyr, and all that good stuff. Those will work really well on smartweed. Typically, like I said, it's going to be on the banks, so it's not going to be that big of a problem. Southern naiad, coontail, and hornwort are some of the other ones here. And yes, they do have some funny names, but they're not as common. Naiads are common. Hornwort and coontail, I haven't had as much experience with in my county or in my ponds that I've worked with. But grass carp will do a great job, like we said, about naiads. It's not that fast, but neither are these weeds from spreading. These are kind of moderate spread weeds, so they're not that bad. But if you do need to treat with chemicals, Dicot and copper as a combo will work. Like I said, copper, I'd be careful. Fluoridone is the best for this. Few more here. Bladderwort. The small air bladders on the rootless plant, they generally submersed with finely dissected leaves, so you can kind of see them there underneath the water. If you were going to bring me this plant, you can pull this one up and then stick it in like a bucket with some water in it or something to that effect. That way we can see it kind of floating a little bit. It's been a tough one to control. Grass carp have seen some effect on this, so try that out and see if it works. If not, of course 2,4-D and Dicot, you can try those, Clipper as well. This weed I haven't seen all that much. I did see it this past year a decent amount, but the years past I haven't. I don't know if that's just due to the weather pattern that we've had this past year or something to that effect. But these two weeds are very distinct with how they look, and you can see they're kind of like have a furry top to the leaf itself. It kind of looks rough, but it kind of also looks like duckweed. So if you have this in your pond, bring it to us because it's easy to misdiagnose what this is. Fluoridone works. Some of the good control is going to be that Dicot again, glyphosate, but with these, you're still going to want that excellent control level. You don't want to just do a good job. You want to make sure the job is done with these two chemicals or two weeds. Lastly, we want to go over UGA Extension does make sure that we accommodate for all with our program. So I just want to show this slide. If y'all have any questions or want to see a larger document, please scan the QR code or screenshot it, and take you to the website. And for questions, we're going to leave the slide up right here. This is our contact information for me and MC. And you can see that MC has created these QR codes that go straight to our news feeds. So if you want to do that or get in touch or get involved with us, get on our newsletters, whatever the case may be, just go ahead and scan those and get in touch with us. But if there's nothing else, MC, we can kind of listen and see if anybody has any questions. You can either drop them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask them. If you don't feel comfortable asking in front of the group, by all means, just you can always send us some emails. I had that last time we did this. We had a good bit of emails come in. So, but feel free to ask away if y'all have any. And if nobody has any questions, MC, would you like to say any final words?
Thank you guys for joining us today.